pass those out to everybody that would like to have a handout for tonight's lesson. Let's see. Before we start the lesson, I've got the mic, so I'm going to do some commercials. One thing that we now have that we have not had until a few weeks ago is a website. It's www.kokconroe.com. You can go there. We have a few things on there. We have where you can buy the t-shirts if you want one. Just be sure to put that you're going to pick up here if you don't want it shipped. That way they don't charge you any shipping charges. The KOK Kids and the KOK Youth, we have a page for them, but I'm still... my creative team and myself, we're still working on some content for those pages, but we will have those on there to encourage young people and kids to come, because when somebody moves into Conroe and they're looking for a church, they're going to look on, guess what? Google, the World Wide Web. They're going to look for churches that they're wanting to go to. Then they're going to go to your website and they're going to see, what do they got going on? Do they have anything for kids? Do they have anything for youth? What do they believe? And they're going to ask those questions. So we want to have that presence there so that we can reach out to people. It's all about reaching out. Then we also have a KOK Instagram. If you're on Instagram, please go to KOK Conroe and like us, follow us on Instagram. Facebook, we're King of Kings Conroe. If you're not already following us on Facebook, please do that. And then that's our website. Also, there's one other thing, that little QR code on the back video sound booth there, that goes to our Healing Hearts Recovery Facebook page. If you haven't followed that, I think we got like 38 followers. We need some more. Y'all go follow it, share it on your pages. It doesn't show like people that come to the meetings, because of course that's anonymous and confidential, but it does show little encouraging things to help people along the way, and if we're having an event, it will be on there. So that's my commercial. I hope y'all enjoyed that. So we're going to get into the genius of suffering tonight. Around the turn of the century, a psychologist named Alfred Adler, he coined what was called the theory of compensation. Adler believed that what we perceive to be disadvantages often prove to be incognito advantages, because they force us to cultivate attitudes or abilities that would have lain dormant or gone undiscovered otherwise. It's as we compensate for these perceived disadvantages. Notice I'm saying perceived, not necessarily disadvantaged, but they're perceived as disadvantages. That's when we discover what Adler called compensatory skills. And it's these compensatory skills that often become our greatest gift to the world. 70% of the art students that Adler interviewed had optical handicaps, which that seems like a disadvantage, doesn't it, if you're an art student, that you've got an optical handicap. But it's these optical handicaps that force them to see the world and to look at the world from another angle, an artistic angle. Some of history's greatest composers, Mozart and Beethoven among them, lost their hearing. They lost their hearing. That seems to be a disadvantage for a composer, doesn't it? But it forced them to look inside and find an inner voice. Adler argued that the success they experienced was not in spite of those disadvantages, but because of those disadvantages. They learned to leverage their weakness by cultivating compensatory skills, skills that compensate for their weakness. You ever known anybody that was blind? They could hear really good, or they could smell really good, because those senses compensated for that sight that they had lost. A few years ago, a fascinating study showed that 35% of small business owners identify as dyslexic. They're dyslexic. Do you know what dyslexia is? It's where you see things backwards. You may see a 12 and think it's a 21. You see it backwards. Academically, dyslexia is a disadvantage. No doubt it makes it harder to read. If you've ever known anybody that's dyslexic, or you've tried to help someone read that's dyslexic, your pastor is one, very dyslexic. He raised his hand, so that's why I'm telling it. But I was helping a young man learn to read one time, and he was about 13 or 14, and I said, now read this paragraph for me. And it was a very easy paragraph. He struggled so bad to read that paragraph, and I thought, no wonder the child doesn't like to read. It is a struggle and a chore for him to read because his letters are getting mixed up, and his eyes are seeing them backwards. It makes it harder to read, but it forced these entrepreneurs to cultivate compensatory skills. Researchers found that those with dyslexia are more creative, they're more intuitive, and they're better at solving three-dimensional problems. And they had developed speaking skills and social skills. And they may have had a hard time reading a book, but they could walk into a room and read it with no problem at all. They could read a room. They had to work harder, but please hear this. It was that work ethic applied to business that caused many of them to say, dyslexia got me to where I am today. That weakness got me to where I am today. Why? Because they not only cultivated their entrepreneurial instincts, but dyslexia taught them how to delegate to others what they weren't good at. It taught them how to let somebody else go do this thing that I can't do. Now just let me get in your business here a little bit. I feel like my job here is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. The reality is that many of our prayers revolve around our own personal comfort, don't they? I need this, Lord. I want that. I got to have this. The problem with that is this. You tell me when the last time you were uncomfortable, and I'll tell you the last time you actually grew. Because you don't grow without discomfort. You growing up. You growing up. The last time you were uncomfortable, and I'll tell you the last time you grew. You can use your perceived disadvantages as an excuse, or you can use it as motivation. If you're looking for an excuse, I promise you will always find one. If you're looking for an opportunity, you will always find one of those as well. Show me your strong hand. Which one is your strong hand? Hold up your strong hand. Okay, for most of us here, it's the right hand. For 90% of us, it's our right hand. The strong hand represents the gifts that God has given us. Now let me see your weak hand. Here's the thing, you can't even write your name with your weak hand. You can't brush your teeth. You just can't do much with that weak hand. But the last time I checked, you can't clap with one hand. God wants to use your strong hand no matter what, but he also wants to use your weak hand. Why? Because his power is made perfect in weakness. In weakness. Now, tonight I absolutely empathize with your disadvantages, and I'm not making light of any disadvantages. But let's put it on the table. They range from injustice to inopportunities, to poverty, to injury, from divorce to a bad health diagnosis. And let's face it, bad things happen to good people. Life is unfair, and then we die. Right? I used to tell my kids when they're little, Mom, that's not fair. That's not fair. And what did I say? Elena's here. She can testify. No, it's not fair. There's no cotton candy. There's no ponies. This is not fair. Life is not fair. But there is a God. There is a God who works all things, say all things together for good to those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Not just the good things, but the bad things too. He's a God that can redeem and recycle, and maybe, just maybe, God is cultivating a compensatory skill in you. And maybe, just maybe, it will be your greatest gift to the world. Whether you're here tonight in our building or whether you're online, on Facebook or on YouTube, welcome to King of Kings Conroe. And welcome to the first lesson of our Genius series. We're going to talk about 7 kinds of genius, and we're going to do it through biographies. So when you study someone, when you study a biography of someone in the Bible, King David, Queen Esther, Moses, Joseph, Miriam, it's sort of like you're looking through a window. The Bible is a book about real people with real problems in real time and real genius. You may think you have problems here today, but start reading about some of those people in the Bible. Their problems will shake us up if we had problems like that. They were worried sometimes about how they were going to eat, famines, all kind of stuff. What we do is we get to look at what made them tick and what ticked them off. And we get to hack their habits and look at their successes and failures. But it's like a window that has a little bit of a reflective quality. It allows you to look in through the window, but also to see yourself. So the goal of this series is very simple. It's to help you discover and develop and deploy your unique genius and to do it for the common good. Albert Einstein said this: everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree, he will live his whole life believing that he is stupid. You can't judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree. He lives in water. All of us are bad at something. Say, I'm bad at something. Am I in the right room? Write it on your handout. Type it in the chat if you're watching online. What are you bad at? What are you bad at? I am directionally challenged. Very directionally challenged. It's been said that I can't find my way out of a paper bag. But I thank God for Google Maps, because all I got to do now is type it in, and it tells me exactly how to get there. Gina and I talk about it sometimes. Somebody will be telling us how to get somewhere. And you go south on 45. I'm south. What am I, Lewis and Clark? Tell me, do I go toward Houston or do I go toward Huntsville? Don't tell me south. I need to know. Do I turn by the Target or do I turn by Chick-fil-A? That's what I need to know, not south, east, west. Directionally challenged. If we judge ourselves by our weakness, though, all of us are fish that can't climb a tree. So we don't judge by our weakness. All of us are guilty of judging each other by our weaknesses, but here's some good news. We think that it's our weaknesses. We think that it's our mistakes that disqualify us from ministry. But I'm here to tell you tonight that's not true. It's our mistakes that are our ministry. It's our mistakes that are our ministry, because that's where God wants to heal and grace, and he wants to use you to help other people. Were you a drug addict? Was that some mistake that you made in your life? You were a drug addict? Wow, that's going to make a great ministry. Man, you're going to be able to help so many people that are struggling with addiction, and you're going to be able to tell your story to help them. Were you an alcoholic? Wow, that's great, because that doesn't disqualify you from ministry. That allows you to have a ministry and to help somebody else that's struggling with alcoholism. Give somebody a high five next to you with your weak hand. With your weak hand. Y'all, come on, y'all got it. Yeah, with your weak hand. Let me backdrop this series with a Venn diagram. This little diagram that I'm going to show you, and it's on your handout as well, the little diagram with the gifts, the passions. There it is. Genius is who you are when you're the best version of yourself. Genius is your unique contribution to the common good. And genius is your X factor, and it has 4 dimensions. So I'm going to break it down for you. The first dimension is gifts. Gifts are manifestations of the Spirit. There's a difference between natural abilities and spiritual gifts. There's a difference between being able to hammer a nail or being able to be used in a word of knowledge. There's natural abilities and there's spiritual gifts. There are motivational gifts like hospitality and generosity, leadership and mercy. There are miraculous gifts like healing and prophecy, words of wisdom, words of knowledge. And those gifts are what enable us to live beyond our experience, beyond our education, beyond our expertise. It's the ability to live beyond our ability. That's awesome, isn't it? Spiritual gifts gives us the ability to live beyond our own ability. Then you've got passions. It's the second dimension. What makes you cry? What makes you pound your fist on the table? What puts a smile on your face? What makes you sad or mad or glad? You see, we experience 412 distinct emotions. That's a lot, isn't it? 412. And that range of emotions, I believe, is part of the image of God, our Creator. And like everything else, our emotions have to be sanctified. Because if they're not, your emotions can run wild on you. They can play tricks on you. They can make you marry a man that is definitely not the man for you, but your emotions, your heart. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because I'd have to be the first one with my hand up. The first one with my hand up found a man that just thought, oh my God, I can't live without him. He's the one for me. And he was not the one for me. And he was not the one for you, but you felt like that you were going to save him and turn him around and make him. It was like I see a piece of furniture on the side of the road. Somebody has set out trash and they don't want it anymore. And I drive by and I say, oh, you're throwing that away. I can paint it and make it beautiful again. I need to save that. So sometimes our emotions get a hold of us and we don't listen to the Word of God or people of God that He has put in our lives, and we just go on those emotions that are not sanctified. Emotions are cues and clues that reveal God's purposes. They almost function like a compass needle. Now, let's be clear. Jesus got sad. You know that? He got sad. He wept over the city of Jerusalem. Jesus got mad. He turned over some tables in the temple and whipped some people out of there. He got mad. And Jesus got glad. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. Now, those gifts and those passions, what we do best and what we love most, they get filtered through our own unique history and personality. History is where you've been. That's your history, where you've been. And no one has walked the road that you've walked. It's the places you've lived. It's the things you've done. It's the people who have left their fingerprints on your soul. You know anybody that's left a fingerprint on your soul? I've got some that I know in my life that have left fingerprints on me. It's the defining moments that make you who you are. Then personality, that's how you're wired. It's your personality type. It's your love languages. It's your spiritual temperaments. It's how you experience God. It's all your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. That's your personality. There never has been, nor will there ever be anyone like you. Never. You're a person all on your own. There's nobody like you. It's not a testament to you, but it's a testament to the God who created you. And the significance of that is this. No one, say no one. No one can love like you. No one can lead like you, and no one can sing like you. No one can serve like you because you have a unique genius. And through this series, I want to help you discover, develop, and deploy that genius. If you brought your Bible tonight, you can turn to Genesis chapter 37. I'm not going to read this stuff word for word, but this is where you can find the stories that I'm going to talk about, is in Genesis chapter 37. When you trace the genealogy of genius, the beginning or the genesis, I hate to say it, but it usually involves some pain and some suffering. Robert Bly said, where a man's wound is, that is where his genius will be. Where a man's wound is, that is where his genius will be. If you succeed without suffering, someone else did. And if you suffer without succeeding, someone else will. Genius is not born of comfort. Genius is born from and born for adversity. Suffering is the seedbed of genius, and Joseph in Genesis is exhibit A. So let me set the scene. For better or worse, all of us is born into somebody else's story. We don't pick our parents. Elena, you didn't get to pick me. I'm sorry, baby. We don't pick our parents. Some of us have amazing parents, and we rise up and call them blessed, right? Proverbs 31 and 28. And then some of us have that father wound, that mother wound. But one way or the other, the family of origin is this place where character and genius is formed. Now, Joseph in this story in the Bible is the youngest of 12 brothers, and that birth order is very significant. If you ever study the birth order, you will see that being born the youngest, being born the eldest, it's significant in how it shapes your personality. His father, Jacob, Joseph's father, is also a youngest son. He's the baby of the family too. 2 observations. Number 1, I find it fascinating that Jacob showed favoritism toward Joseph because he didn't like that when his brother was getting the favoritism. But he showed favoritism toward Joseph, and that was evidenced by a coat of many colors that Jacob made for Joseph. And the problem with that is it's perpetuated by this unhealthy family dynamic that fueled this sibling rivalry. You know what I'm talking about? You ever seen parents that say about kids, oh, maybe I'll use Rowan and Landon as examples. Well, Rowan is mommy's favorite and Landon is daddy's favorite. You ever seen parents do that? I can't stand that. It's one of my pet peeves. Don't show favoritism to your children. It creates jealousy. It creates sibling rivalry that's not healthy. But this is what Jacob had done with Joseph. And then number 2, Jacob deceives his father, right? He steals the blessing from his older brother Esau. Our actions, for better or worse, have an effect on our family tree because he did that and then it affected Joseph down the line. You know why we need to break some habits? You know why we need to break some generational curses? It's not just for us, but it's for the 3rd and the 4th generations. All of that is to say this: you and I are shaped by our family of origin in 1,000 different ways, both consciously and subconsciously. How we gain attention, how we resolve conflict, how we treat other ethnicities, how we treat the opposite sex, how we express emotions, how we process pain. These adaptive strategies, these defense mechanisms, these coping mechanisms, they're first developed in our family of origin. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Does that make sense? Until this stuff that's in the back of your mind unconsciously swirling around, until you make it conscious, it's going to take you on every pig trail that comes along, and you're going to call it fate. You got to figure out what's leading you and making sure that it's the right thing leading you. If you don't own the pain and suffering will own you. You better own it. Well, how do we own it, Sister Reese? Well, that's where the good news of the gospel comes into play. You grieve it. You reconcile it. You heal it. You redeem it. You forgive it with the help of the Holy Ghost. You do these things. Now, there's no way to go into all of Joseph's personality in one lesson, but I want to talk about a couple of defining moments in his life and just connect the dots. Joseph has a dream at 17 years old, and this is when the door opens and lets his future in. In Genesis 37:5, Joseph dreamed a dream, but if only it had stopped there. If he would have just dreamed the dream, it might have been okay if it would have stopped. But he didn't. He told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. You see, this ability to dream was a part of his genius, no doubt, and I would suggest that the dreaming was part of his strong hand. But there's also a weak hand. You see, Joseph evidently missed the class on inside thoughts. I know some people that have missed that class too, because if a thought is inside their head, it comes outside their mouth. Anybody in here with siblings already knows if you tell your brothers about a dream where they bow down to you, you're going to take a trip to Busch Gardens. Y'all know where that is? That's where you walking along and they come along and push you into the bushes because they're mad about it. They're going to push you in. Be careful who you share your dreams with, especially in the early stages, because in my experience, there are dream catchers and there are dream killers. Newsflash, not everyone's going to get excited about your dream. Why do you think that is? Why? Because it's convicting. That's why. Because it disrupts the status quo. You see, Joseph has a dream, and as is the case with many dreams, it turns into a nightmare. Anybody have a dream that turned into a nightmare before it maybe turned back into a dream? His brothers, they fake his death. They sell him into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. And then it goes from bad to worse for 13 years, right? Falsely accused. I mean, he's in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife is making a pass at him, and he's like trying to get away from this woman, and she keeps on. Next thing you know, she grabs his coat, and she tells her husband he was in here trying to, do something with me. He sends him to prison. So he's falsely accused, found guilty of a crime he didn't commit. He spends his 20s, his entire 20s, he spends in an Egyptian dungeon. That's a lot of trauma. You spend your entire 20s in a prison for something you didn't even do. Now, I don't have time tonight to deep dive into trauma, but I will say this. Trauma has one of two effects. It can cause post-traumatic stress syndrome. The body keeps score, right? It can be something that paralyzes us or immobilizes us. But what I find interesting is that research suggests that about 80% of trauma actually results in post-traumatic growth. That may have been the first time you've heard this. It results in post-traumatic growth. Now, once again, I'm not making light of the disadvantages, the poverty, the lack of opportunity, injustice. Nothing makes that less painful or less traumatic, less wrong or less unjust. But there is a way to grow through it. There's a way. Fast forward 13 years. Genesis 39:21 says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and granted him favor with the prison warden." If you're taking notes, I want you to jot this down. If you're here in person, it's on your handout. Circle it. Favor is the it factor, which means it's not going to change. Favor is the it factor. Emotional intelligence is the X factor, or the variable. Favor is the difference between the best you can do and the best God can do. And it's a lot. Favor. I pray for favor all the time, and I make no apologies for it. I pray for favor. Favor is God's grace that he gives us. If I'm going into a meeting, I pray for God's favor. God's favor, because it's the difference between the best I can do and the best God can do. And his best is always better than mine. Favor is the it factor, and you can't take that out of the equation. But there's an X factor, or a variable, and it's called emotional intelligence. Has anybody ever heard of that? According to Daniel Goldman, only about 20% of factors that lead to success have to do with IQs, or intelligence quotients. Only 20% of success. The other 80% has to do with emotional intelligence. And he defines it this way: the ability to identify, assess, and control one's own emotions, the emotions of others, and that of groups. Spiritual gifts are awesome. We love spiritual gifts in this church. They're awesome, and I pray that God activates those gifts in each and every one of us. But you have to operate in those gifts with some emotional intelligence. If you don't, this is what you're going to get. Let me find somebody I can use for an example. Pastor, come on up here. You look like you want to be an example. Just stand right here. Pretend like he's in his pew or he's at the altar. He's new. Face me. This is first time here. And I feel an emotion come over me that I need to pray for him. And so I'm going to come run over here to him, and the Spirit's on me. And I start praying for him all over him, and I'm just giving him a rub down, and he's just standing there. Emotional intelligence needs to kick in and say, he's not ready to receive this. Maybe I need to back up a little bit. But sometimes we're just so into our own emotions and our own self, we don't control that and rein it in. But if we start to pray for him, we put a hand on him, and he's like, woo, yes, I'm ready to receive. And you can see he's in it. Pray for him by all means. You don't need to give him a rub down or slap him all up beside his head, face and head. But pray for him and keep doing that. But use emotional intelligence, thank you, to look and see where they're at when you're praying for them. It's important, because otherwise you're going to end up with a dysfunctional operation of the gifts. God can be trying to use you. He can be trying to let a gift work through you, but you will not do anything because you won't try to get your emotional intelligence in check and learn and get it higher than it has been. Genesis 40 verse 1 says, I'm going to speed through this. I'm just going to touch on a couple of defining moments. 1 through 3 talks about, it came to pass, the cupbearer and the baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials, and he put them in the prison where Joseph was. Now, reminder, God is in the business of strategically positioning us in the right place at the right time with the right people. Now, here's the catch. Sometimes, many times, it seems like the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, because this is the last place that Joseph wants to be. The last place. And the circumstances that put him here are absolutely unjust. But this is when and where and how divine appointments happen. This is how they happen. All of us want a miracle, but none of us want to be in a situation that requires a miracle, right? But you can't have one without the other. So look at what happens in verse 4. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph. Isn't that interesting? You think God had anything to do with that? Each of the two men had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph saw them the next morning, now here it is, he noticed. He what? He noticed that they both looked depressed. Hold up, wait a minute. Is this the same guy? Is this the same guy that 13 years earlier took a trip to Busch Gardens? Because he had like no emotional intelligence, none whatsoever. You know, he just busted out with this dream to his brothers. And now he's noticing a slight shift in facial expressions. Wow. What happened to Joseph? I'll tell you what happened. A little suffering will produce a lot of empathy. A lot. It's been 13 years since Joseph dreamed a dream, and look at where that got him, right? So there's a part of him that's thinking, I don't even want to operate with my strong hand anymore. I don't even want to use that gift anymore because it didn't turn out very well for me. So it takes some courage for Joseph to get back up on that horse and use his strong hand and interpret that dream. But I want you to notice that weak hand, because I would suggest that over the course of 13 years that God was cultivating a compensatory skill that would save two nations from famine. Joseph, who was self-absorbed at 17, Joseph, who has very little emotional intelligence, it's almost like he now has this Peter Parker spidey sense. You know, he can just sense it. He senses it. He notices a sad look on the face of his fellow inmate. And you can read right over this, but this is the turning point. One act of emotional intelligence saves two nations from extinction. There is a common denominator among successful leaders, and that commonality is that they are first-class noticers. Your pastor is one of those first-class noticers. You're blessed to have that. We'll go home sometime after church, and this has been going on for years, and he'll be like, did you see so-and-so during church? They slept all during the service. And I'm like, no, I didn't notice, you know. And then he's like, Yeah, they did. Oh, but did you see this one? They had their hands raised and tears were just flowing down their face. And he's noticing all of it. And I'm like, nah, I didn't see that either. He's noticing. Leaders who succeed again and again are geniuses at grasping context. It's a characteristic that's difficult to break down, but it's the ability to weigh a lot of factors. Some as subtle as how different groups of people will interpret a gesture. It's one of the hallmarks of a true leader. It's kind of like when you go into some countries, for us, when we say a meal was good, oh, that was great, it was good. That's an insult in some countries because they want to hear you say, I'm satisfied. I have been satisfied. And it's an insult when you say, oh, it was good. It's kind of like, it was all right, So, to be able to interpret a gesture is one of the true hallmarks of a good leader. If Joseph hadn't discerned this look, what if he hadn't discerned this look? This history of two nations hinged on his emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, or the lack thereof, can put nations at war. 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream, and that's when the butler finally remembers Joseph. 2 years later. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream, and the next thing you know, he's second in command, and two nations are saved. Favor is the it factor. Emotional intelligence is the X factor, and it's a compensatory skill that God cultivates. How? I hate to say it because nobody wants to hear it, but he cultivates it through pain and through suffering. This is where we need to quit looking through the window and look in the mirror. Philippians 3:10 says, I want to know Christ in the power of his resurrection. Whoo, that gets me fired up, don't it you? I want to know him in the power. The same spirit that lived in Christ and raised him from the dead now lives in me, and I'm ready to take on the world. But that verse doesn't end there. I want to know Christ in the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his suffering. Wait. I'm not sure this is what I signed up for. I signed up for the being raised from the dead and taking on the world. I'm not sure I signed up for this fellowship of this suffering business. But what makes us think that we can become like Jesus without being tempted by the devil, criticized by Pharisees, betrayed by Judas, mocked by the mob, and crucified by Roman soldiers? You don't have to go looking for suffering. It will find you soon enough. And I've had people sometimes telling me, complaining about what they're going through, and oh my God, they're talking about me so bad. They are running me down in the dirt. They are just telling lies on me. It's just lies. And wah. And I say, well, congratulations. Man, you're just like Jesus. Because they did all those things to him too. Congratulations, man. You must be doing something right. The question is, what do you do with it? This is where you got to learn the lesson. You got to cultivate the character, and you got to curate the change. Genesis 50:20, Joseph said, you intended to harm me. Joseph says this to his brothers. All the pain in that statement. Can you imagine after all these years? You intended to harm me. You cut me, man. You cut me deep. You hurt me. You hurt me. I don't have time to talk about the gift of tears, but I see Nehemiah crying before he rebuilds that wall. I see the weeping prophet Jeremiah. And 8 times in this text, Joseph is brought to tears. 8 times. What are tears? That's what we do when we run out of words. When we don't know what to say, we cry. See, God gave you tear ducts, family, and what a gift. What a gift. Did you know that tear ducts actually increase a neurotransmitter in your brain that's a painkiller. That is scientifically proven. That is why you cry when you get hurt. When you hurt yourself physically and you cry, it's releasing a painkiller into your body. Let's use those tears and use them for God's glory. Joseph said, "You intended to harm me, brothers, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done." 13 years later, the saving of many lives. All of us have what is called an explanatory style, and I've talked to you about this before. It's the manner in which you habitually explain to yourself why something happened, why events happen. A little bit of tough love right here. Your explanations are more important. How you explain it is more important than the experience. Most of our prayers, we ask God to change our circumstances. Get us out of this mess, Lord. Change it. Get that person out of my life. Move me away from them. Get me out of this job I'm in. Whatever. We ask God to change our circumstances. The very same circumstances that sometimes God has ordained to change us. He's using them to change us. Now, we got to fight injustice. We got to right wrongs. These are things that we're all about. But I'm just saying that you got to figure out how you're going to explain things to yourself. This is Joseph's explanatory style. Without this explanatory style, it's just revenge. It's getting even. It's anger eating him alive without this explanatory style. Oh, forget that. I'm just going to go sleep with Potiphar's wife. So what's the use of integrity at this point? My brothers have sold me into slavery. I mean, nobody wanted me. Why do I need to try to have integrity? No. Because he has an explanatory style, and it's the difference between bitter and better. It will make us or it will break us. If you want to change your life tonight, you have to change your story. The story you tell yourself, you explain to yourself. This is the story Joseph is telling himself. You see, 3 times the Apostle Paul says, take away the thorn in the flesh. You remember that? This is what we do. We bargain with God. God, if you'll do this, I'll do that. If you'll do this, I'll start coming to church faithfully. If you'll do that, I'll get involved. God, if you'll do this, I'll do that. If you would take away that thorn, Lord, if you would take away that weakness, now you can use me if you'll just get rid of that thing. Now I can make a difference. And God says, no. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Because what I want to do is beyond your natural ability. It's through your brokenness that I'm going to exercise a manifestation of my spirit. These gifts so that you can't take the credit for it. Because God will share his glory with no man. This is where you discover your genius and your weaknesses, your pain and suffering, your headaches, your heartbreaks, your disadvantages. Suffering is the seedbed of genius. Can we look in the mirror one more time? Some of us are so focused on getting out of difficult situations that we never get anything out of the difficult situation. And then we find ourselves right back in the same difficult situations. My husband and I, for years, we went around this particular mountain over and over. And when we would get back around to it again, I'd be like, come on, why are we having to go through this again? The same thing. What are we not learning? Because the trial, the suffering, it comes to teach you something. And if you're not getting it right, you're going to go through it again. You're going to keep taking that test until you pass it. You got to learn the lesson. You got to cultivate the character, and you got to curate the change. When we're going through a tough time, we have a tendency to isolate. Can I get an amen in here? I can look out across here and name a few of them that are kin to me. Not you, Rowan. You don't isolate. We have a tendency to isolate, to get by ourselves, and that's exactly what the enemy wants you to do. He wants you to isolate, but that's not what we need to do. We need our community. We need each other. That's when I need you and you need me, when I'm going through something. There's nothing neat and clean about pain and suffering. It's messy. It's messy, but we got to do better at suffering. And by that, I don't mean sidestepping it. I don't mean avoiding it. I mean, ask that question. What did you come to teach me? Why are you here? I need to learn something. Why are you here? Don't play the victim when things go bad. You're not a victim. Don't play God when things go good. You didn't make it happen. Don't use suffering as an excuse. Use it as motivation. Don't lose faith in the end of the story. Cultivate a growth mindset. Dig deep and give God the sacrifice of praise, and this too shall pass. 463 times in the King James Version of the Bible, it says, it came to pass. It came to pass. Remember, trials and tribulations, they don't come to stay. They come to pass. But while it's passing, while you are suffering, I heard someone say this, it came to pass. It may pass like a kidney stone, but it's going to pass. You might be hurting while it passes. While you're suffering, maybe, just maybe, God is cultivating that compensatory skill in you. And maybe, just maybe, it's your greatest gift to the world. The genius of suffering. Pastor.
Was that good? Come on, let's give her another hand clap.